Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this LinkedIn Live event. We are going to talk about challenges in negotiating long-term contracts. And we're going to take specifically the perspective of the oil and gas industry because we have with us an expert in the field, Filippo Rigoni, and we will get to know him in a moment. First of all, thank you very much for joining. And we want to know something more about our audience, right? We don't want to talk only about us. So, how about if you tell us, for instance, from where you're connecting? Or what has attracted you to this LinkedIn Live event? I mean, I am delighted because I have to confess you that one of my competitors, another negotiation professor, had a LinkedIn Live exactly at the same time, and we had 7 times the number of participants than his event. So we are delighted that you've chosen our event rather than other events at the same time. So tell us what attracted you to this event, or tell us, from where you're connecting so that we have an idea. I mean, both Filippo and I are Italians, but, are we going to have an audience of Italians, or are we going to have an audience from people from all over the world? So let's see. Here we are. The first person is not Italian. It's actually Angeliki from Greece. Hello, Angeliki. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. But are we going to have only European, or are we going to have people from different continents? I will be quite confident that we're going to get people from different parts because we have been traveling quite a lot. I've been working in 5 different countries, and Filippo has also been doing lots of negotiation all over the world. So I'm sure that we're going to hear some more from him. So let's see. We have Lana from Zurich. Hello, Lana. Good to see you, at least virtually. And let's get some more insight, from our audience. I mean, that I know that it takes a little moment, to get started. And maybe, as we wait for the different people to connect and to join us, here we have indeed Brazil. Okay, we have also Brazil with us. Indeed, we have some other continents, but also Italy. Hello, Jessica. Thank you for being with us. But then we have also the US with Christina. So amazing, we see the diversity of the people. Natasha from Serbia. Okay, so fantastic. We do have the international kind of audience that we were looking for. Fantastic. Filippo, can you tell us a bit more about yourself so that our audience can learn a few more things about you?
Absolutely. Hi, Giuseppe, first of all, and thanks for having me here today. Thanks for everybody who has been joining us in this conversation. It's great to see so many people joining. And wow, you built a lot of pressure on me saying that there was such a big competition between you and your pal, on the other webinar. Well, as you said, I'm Italian, and I think my accent betrays my origin as well. I've been working in the energy sector for over 20 years. And I'm very interesting. When I first started working after my graduation, I was kind of like targeting my career towards diplomatic, and then I end up working in the energy context, which is somehow justifies a lot, on my choice from a professional perspective. I've been working in the oil and gas sector mainly. But I've covered also utilities and renewables in my career, always in a commercial and business development role. And I've, as you said, worked in several countries. I've worked in Italy and in Northern Europe, but also in Middle East and North Africa, Eastern Europe and US as well. So great to be here. Great to progress in this conversation to you today. And we started by knowing each other a year ago after having attended one of your fantastic masterclass, and it's great that we have progressed this conversation and having this live session today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Filippo. And, today we are touching at 2 elements, right? We're talking about the negotiation, we're talking about oil and gas. So, Filippo, tell me what are the main characteristics of the oil and gas sector which can affect negotiations?
Absolutely. So let me spend a couple of words on the oil and gas sector, the energy sector. This is a sector that has a lot of contradiction in itself. On one side, of course, can attract externally a lot of bias. Somebody loves it, somebody hates it. It's very cyclical, so you don't never have like a stable situation in the oil and gas sector. There's always evolution ongoing, and this is what happened on the external environment. From an inner perspective, on the other side, this is an industry which really relies on long-term investments. So it really needs, to commit for high long-term capital expenditures. Of course, it can generate a lot of revenues in good periods, but it also can suffer, depending on the commodity price ongoing. And this kind of dichotomy actually it's embedded in the type of negotiation that you need to embrace when you invest or you decide to progress a negotiation under the oil and gas sector. Because on one side, you want to secure as much as possible terms which will be reliable and actually support your vision and your business investment on the long term. On the other side, you want also to have the flexibility eventually to be able to change and modify terms, especially if some external factors will affect the remuneration of the project. I think it's, of course, in these days, energy and security of energy is on everybody's top of mind, considering what's happening on the geopolitical level. And, if you put yourself in a situation in which you had to negotiate, for example, a long-term gas contract or an investment for an upstream field 20 years ago, I hope nobody really had in mind, that from a geopolitical level, we will be facing such level of complexity and uncertainty today. And as always, there's somebody who's benefiting of these uncertainties and somebody who's suffering. And therefore, all of that needs to be captured, when you negotiate a contract. Another feature, of course, is the diversity. You have to deal with a lot of different players. You have big international oil companies, medium-sized international oil companies, national oil companies, which of course are very important players in the marketplace. And most recently, there have been also all kinds of new financial-driven type of player that has been joining the playground and the marketplace, like private equity funds, which of course are driven from different type of KPIs in terms of what is their long-term goal of being part of this industry. So very diverse, very let's say flexible, but at the same time rigid from a perspective of an investment. Very exciting. I love this. I love this area. I've been doing this for many years, and it's really something that gives me a personal fulfillment.
Yeah. Well, Filippo, let me build on this question and clarify a couple of elements. We say long-term contract. You gave an example of 20 years. I mean, is this a typical kind of long-term contract, or would you say that the average length may be a bit different?
No, pretty much. Especially on the infrastructure side, many years ago, those kind of investments require certainty and a good visibility in terms of the flow of revenues that you're going to estimate. And yes, the life of and the maturity of investments might be of that side. Most recently, these contracts have been shortened. So, for example, gas supplies has changed and definitely try to adapt more on the dynamics of the market, and therefore parties negotiating this kind of contract have been reducing the length with the optionality.
Okay, I see.
Long-term horizon, and this is where of course you're gonna have scenarios. You're gonna build yourself a view in terms of how the market is gonna deploy over time, but you have no certainty, and that's why you need to build that flexibility. I'm sure there are a lot of or few people attending this conversation that are coming from the legal background, and please close your ears now. But instead of having very detailed clauses in the contract, a bit of vagueness can help, because those are the kind of situation in which you want to maybe challenge the interpretation of the contract and pretend you can reopen a certain discussion or a negotiation on the basis that terms have changed, and therefore you need to amend or modify the conversation and the agreement with your counterpart.
Yeah. And I think, in the interpretation of the contract, there is also a cultural dimension. Let's say, for instance, the American likes very detailed contract, right, where everything is spelled out to. I remember working for Procter and Gamble, and our standard contract was maybe 72 pages, right? And while when you negotiate with people in Asia, then there is more of a tendency, let's agree the general terms, and then we're gonna manage the situation as the things change. And this makes me think really of the other element that you were mentioning before, right? Oil and gas is an international business. So how important is to take cultural diversity into account?
Oh, that's key. That's key. As you said, I mean, like when you enter into a negotiation for in the oil and gas, you most likely have at least several different or people with different origins around the table. This kind of discussion involves, as I said, national oil companies, so country specific, but most likely you will have an international expert or external advisor attending, so they're bringing their knowledge, they're bringing their expertise. The industry has tried to consolidate over time, so there have been guidelines and institutions that have published standard templates for contract in order to give a general framework for negotiation. But even those are very different depending on the region. As you said, Europe has some specific contract, North America and US in general, other type of contract. So the framework is really kind of a starting point. And then the cultural dimension of the people around the table is really what influenced the negotiation itself. You can imagine, like language today is almost perceived as not a barrier, but the reality is it really matters. Like people not being, for example, fluent in English will end up negotiating a contract in a foreign language, and depending on their fluidity with that and the ownership of the language, they might interpret different clauses and trying to adapt it to their own personal and cultural interpretation, and that can create issues. Like when you're trying to express and find a compromise agreement. I have a couple of examples, maybe that I'd like to quote on that.
Yeah, go ahead. I think it's interesting, for the people, to get an idea about, how it may be different to negotiate those kind of long-term contracts with different cultures.
Absolutely. So you were referring earlier to your experience in the US. So I've been dealing with a few contracts with having a very good skilled American partner with me on the side of the table, and of course I'm not mother tongue English, so I'm coming with a practical experience and fluency. But of course, like I don't have the same level of granularity and of the vocabulary. But as an observer standing behind, I could see, for example, that our counterpart as well were quite uncomfortable, because the person was trying to communicate and give the very specific richness of its sentences and its arguments, and the other side of the table was not really capturing, and in a sense were actually feeling a little bit intimidated by the fact that the person that was sitting on the other side of the table was so fluent and so rich and was trying to express principles in a very articulated way. So again, not always, being so enhancing in terms of communication might result in actually delivering the best communication on the other side of the table. Another example, when it comes to culture, is how you interact with people. I've been working quite a lot in North Africa, for example, and which is very similar to Southern European. So as an Italian, I find myself very comfortable and enjoy doing business in North Africa. And there are countries there where, for example, when you start having your early scratch, the first meeting, you get out of the meeting with the perception that everything is easy, because it kind of like never really contradict or never really push back on issues. But the reality is that that's not a yes. They're just being kind and polite and trying to be very, very warm and not saying no. At the first place, although in their mind, they are clear that there's something of this that you're proposing might not be exactly what's in their best interest, and therefore in the long run, they're going to reveal that the negotiation is not going in the direction you believe so.
Okay. Now, across the whole negotiation process, what phase do you think is more critical during a negotiation in your sector?
for me has always been about the preparation. Don't get me wrong, I think it's the one which I enjoy the most, of course, is being around the table and trying to close the deal. I mean, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's actually where you had you already done a lot of work in order to be there, and that's kind of like the moment that gives you the kind of the excitement. No, preparation is key. Preparation is key, and I think when it comes about preparation, it's about learning and being sure about what are your goals, making sure you have understood exactly what you're trying to extract from the negotiation, making sure, you have identified, what are the main drivers from your counterpart around the table. Maybe do a little bit of investigation, try to understand what's the negotiation style. Trying to understand, for example, the team composition, who's going to be sitting around you. I know it might sound odd, but personally I found that a little bit of rehearsal getting into a room might even be useful. It's not something that is very common, I think, but I learned it, from some experts like you, and having tested yourself in a dry run internally with some of your colleagues gets you ready also to react to certain type of pushback you might be facing during the interaction with your counterpart. So there's a lot to be done, before starting a negotiation. And I think, especially if you blend it with the earlier question about diversity and international and cultural differences, that's also something that is very key. Again, out of my experience, I've been in negotiation in which, for example, it was key to understand what the counterpart had done in similar discussion with other players. So a lot of intelligence, try to understand, what kind of terms were agreed before, because depending on the specificity of the contract, the person maybe didn't have really a lot of delegation of authority to divert from previously agreed terms, and that's a very important starting point if you're starting your negotiation from scratch, because at least you will know that that's kind of like an area of mutual agreement that, if it's suitable for you, can lead you, to a much faster and at least a much more comfortable ending point.
Yeah. And of course, the cultural dimension in delegation of authority is very important, right? There are certain culture where there is more of an empower of the people that are at the negotiation table, while other culture, will let, very little room to the negotiator to do their own things. And so many things are already set up front and need approval from higher management in order to make it happen.
Absolutely. If I can build on that, another example, which for me was very wide opening. The first time I negotiated a contract with an Eastern European country, I entered the room with the aspiration of trying to get out, of course, the best term, and they really faced the wall. So they really faced the team of negotiator on the other side of the table, which were not even to discuss, any terms of the contract, to the point that I was kind of astonished, and I said, well, why are we even here? Why are we having this type of meeting? If you're not even ready, to discuss, let's call the commas of the terms. And then I realized, having done a little bit of intelligence, maybe I should have done it earlier, as I recommended earlier to the crowd, that, that's kind of standard. It takes them 3 or 4 rounds before they start opening up and actually telling you what is that they are willing to negotiate, what it is that they're willing to discuss, because the person in the room, the first couple of rounds, are some junior guys, which no empowerment, as you said, no delegation of authority. Therefore, their mandate is just to be there and trying to do let's call it a salami slice, try to see if you're ready to give up early some of the terms, so that actually when the person will come, the most senior person will come in the room, then will take the position from an advantage perspective and trying to, of course, bring the contract to their best interest.
Yeah, and that's also pretty much the dynamics that we are seeing in the major political and health crisis that we are living right now, right? The discussion that are taking place at the stage are at low level and with a very strong position from the two parties, and then hopefully I think everyone hopes that we were going to get over time, to a better solution where the top leaders will join, will get at the table, and we may get, to peace that I think is something that everybody in the scholars is waiting for.
Definitely.
I want to build also on another topic, another comment that you made before, the story of the team negotiation and the rehearsal, right? And I want to share a small story. It was already the last century, It was in 1998, I was negotiating a global agreement with ABB, and for transformer and low voltage equipment. And it was actually a tender, so I was meeting a number of leading companies in this field. We ended up choosing ABB for this global agreement. And as I met, some time later, the person that was leading there was the sales vice president, my counterpart. She mentioned to me that they have been rehearsing for a week. The whole team that was coming to the P&G meeting had been rehearsing for a week to make sure that they would really prepare all the possible questions, anticipate, align, and shape the negotiation so that they could influence us, that they will come up as the best company for this global collaboration. Because of course, to have an idea, over 20 years ago, global agreements were quite unusual. Very few procurement companies were advanced, sophisticated to be able to put in place a global agreement across business unit and those kind of things. And the P&G was indeed one of the leaders in this field. So it was, of course, an important contract for them, and you have to put the means behind to make sure that indeed you maximize your chance of success. By the way, I take this opportunity also to give some information to our audience. On the 15th and 16th of June in Geneva, we have an influence and persuasion masterclass. We have an influence and persuasion masterclass with a professor from Oxford, Owen Derbyshire, the academic director of the Oxford Program on Negotiation. So it will be actually Owen and I running the master classes. It will be for 2 days together. Plus, we have a 2 years learning package after the master class to continue the learning journey over time, to continue to support you in the learning journey. And we are having a special promotion ongoing until the end of March. So check on the chat. You may be interested to have a look at this masterclass, because that's maybe something that gives you a competitive edge, your influencing skills, both externally and internally. Because, in a number of companies, I hear that the internal influencing challenges are more difficult than the external ones. So if that's one of your case, then, how about considering influence and persuasion masterclass in Geneva? And it is at Geneva Airport, just in front of the train station at Geneva Airport. So you can either fly or take a train to join us on the 15th and 16th of June. Okay. By the way, if you want to continue the learning, Filippo, and then we're going to go back. Tomorrow, we are going to have another LinkedIn Live. We have a webinar, actually. Tomorrow, we have a webinar on influencing for career success. So tomorrow, at the same time, at 2 o'clock, I will be running this webinar on influencing for career success. So if you want to make a step change in your career, if you want to learn a few techniques that can help you, or just, get a rehearsal to make sure that you are doing the things right, then join us tomorrow at 2 o'clock, influencing for career success. Last one, and then we continue the discussion on contract in oil and gas. Next Friday, the 25th, I have a LinkedIn Live event with the Oxford professor, Owen Derbyshire, Psychology of Influence and Persuasion. So again, if you want to learn, we are there for you. Of course, the LinkedIn Live are there to give you insight, to give you idea. Then in the masterclass, then you get the exercises, you get the personal feedback, you get to interact with our senior executive. So of course, it moves the learning to a completely different level. But just to join the LinkedIn Live already gives you some insight. And then, if you're really serious about becoming a master influencer, then you can join the master class, but the special price is on until the end of March. Okay, back now to negotiating long-term contract in the oil and gas industry. I mean, and we already touched that a number of interesting topics. Now, another thing that comes to my mind, many counterparts in oil and gas contract are states or states-owned, state-participated entity. How does that get reflected in negotiations?
No, absolutely, you're right. I think it's especially when you think about the developing. I mean, like natural resources, most of the contracts are dealt with state company. They are the major players in their country. Of course, they are empowered by the government in terms of regulating and dealing with the development of natural resources, and therefore they are very skilled counterpart that you will find around your table, pretty often. How does it impact? Well, again, it goes back to the old concept of like, what are the goals? So in a private company, very likely you will know exactly what's your driver, what's your ultimate goal, what you're trying to extract, and it's going to be long-term profitability for your company. It's going to be like a specific need that you want to feel. When you deal with the state-owned company, I think there is a little bit of intelligence and understanding that needs to be done. Sometimes, like the ultimate goal is not always known even by the parties that are around the table. So there are things which are bigger rather than just the commercial driver of being part of a negotiation. So that's something that needs to be taken into account when you deal with the negotiation, because not always, you will be able to understand correctly, what's the dynamics behind. On the other side, another thing, of course, and maybe it's a bit of stereotype, is the pace. State-owned company have a very diversified decision-making process, so not always, you will get to the bottom of it just by having one person accountable in front of you. So you need to play over different layers. You need to have a more direct negotiation on one side, and the other side trying to influence maybe people that is in different departments or different layers of the hierarchy within the state company. And this is again, something which sometimes is difficult to be appreciated by Western company, because they are trying to be very pragmatic. You go there. I've experienced it myself, being a negotiator for various companies, and they say, well, you go there and you close the deal in a month. Well, that time expectation, it cannot always match. What's the dynamic of dealing with the state? And I'll quote here an Algerian friend, which has been on the other side of the table for me many times, and who used to say to me that in Algeria they say it's shuya shuya, so slowly, because their perception is like, in any delays there is a possible gain. So if you do everything in a rush, you might have a deal, but you might not have explored all the different nuances of trying to extrapolate value from the commercial negotiation. So I don't want to say that making long, lengthy negotiation is something always good, but they definitely have an edge that if you try to lingering for good, then there are more things which can be dropped on the table, and therefore a few other things that you can extract. Of course, time is an issue. And everybody wants to nail the contract and close it down. So my advice is that try always, to make sure you have a very tight deadline. Never leave a table with somebody unless you have agreed next time you're going to meet, and what needs to be done by that date, because time pressure, will help expediting and maintaining a certain pace in your discussion with your counterpart.
Yeah. Perfect. Now, I think, by the way, you can ask a question, right? This is your LinkedIn Live, so don't be afraid, to tell us, what you think about this event. I mean, Vlad is saying, I just want to react to cultural difference. There are big difference between Western and Eastern countries. But the example that you were mentioning also indicates that the difference are not only the nationality, right? It may be a state-owned company versus a company that is more privately owned, but all of us, let's say, are influenced by different element. I'm Giuseppe. Yes, I am Italian, but I have also a Swiss part because I lived in Switzerland for a long time. I am Catholic. I am a male. I worked in procurement a substantial amount of time. I spent a lot of time with P&G. All those factors, influence my way of thinking. So an individual is not only the nationality in the passport, but there are a number of elements which have an impact in who we are. Now, and we are talking about individual, but before you mention the team components, because in long-term contract, right, is never a one-to-one type of discussion. Let's say, how important is the team?
No, you're absolutely right. And like when you try to approach a negotiation, most likely you end up having like at least 4 or 5 persons sitting on each side of the table, and I'm kind of like generous here. It happened to me a few times that you have like a room of 20 people and you're like sitting in front of you between lawyers and external advisors and members of your team or senior members attending there. So team, it's fundamental. I mean, like, you need to understand upfront, I mean, like who's going to be there, which kind of role, I mean, like they're going to play. Well, you might have a lead negotiator, but one person, it's always no good, because especially when you are involved in the discussion, you might be losing pieces of what's happening on the side, so you might not appreciate, what type of reaction the other people around the table might have. Sometimes, you have people that kind of hijack the discussion. So they kind of derail the main topic by drilling down in some specific details, which probably are very, very live and very, very, very important for that specific moment, but in the scheme of the game are not really what you're trying to do. So you need to have people with you that will intervene, will complement, will potentially try to drive it back and make sure that the conversation flow goes ahead. There are negotiators which are normally extremely skilled, and they try to separate their feelings and their avoid being overwhelmed by passion, and other which, on the opposite, they actually use that as a way for forcing the pace of the conversation. I remember I used to have with me in a round of conversation a very senior person, the country manager of the country where we were negotiating, and he had no real expertise on that matter. He had completely different background. He was there primarily to assist. But the most important thing, he had a role of putting a pause in the negotiation, on the discussion, when he had the perception that it was becoming too much personalized and feelings were coming over. Exactly. So the person was really a top personality, because every time you had the sense that the situation was becoming like more a knock to knock or a head to head, he would ask for a break, for a smoke, and after a couple of times, I really enjoyed this, and I asked, well, I never see you smoking. I said, I don't smoke. For me, it was just an excuse. Nobody will say, like you said, if you need to pause, for something that is it's completely out of the business, it's not disrespectful. But ultimately, it says it wasn't for me. It was more, for making sure that everybody was coming down and be able to go back to the discussion without carrying forward that bad feeling of maybe a heated discussion that was taking place.
Fantastic. And remember, let's put a bit of context of this negotiation. Remember, one of the first points that Filippo mentioned is the alignment, right? Making sure that you prepare together and that you're on the same page. Eventually you role play some of the situations, some of the questions, some of the challenges that you may face. And the break may be a way to count down. If the discussion becomes too heated, it may also be a way to realign, right? There is some new evidence that came during the meeting, and then calling a break on a regular basis enables the team to discuss again and check whether you are on the same page. Maybe let's me take one more quick tip on team negotiation. Define roles for everyone. Right? You don't go into a negotiation where everybody is free to talk and they do whatever best. Then you say, okay, who is the lead negotiator, who is the decision maker? technical, commercial, body language observer, not tanker, number cruncher. There may be good guy, bad guy. Sometimes, these are also is also used from time to time, maybe too often. But the point is, do make sure that the person that go at the negotiation table know what is the task, because like Filippo was saying, the lead negotiator, if he's in the heated discussion, he may not be able at the same time to listen effectively to everyone, and at the same time to check the body language, and at the same time to crunch the number, and at the same time, etc., etc. So that's where the strength of the teams come in negotiating effectively those kind of deals. Let me take a question from the audience. And again, we still have a few minutes. So, if you want, there is time for one more question. But let's take a question from Lana. I would like to hear more about negotiating with the big ones who want their terms and conditions and no deviations.
I mean, that's a classic. I mean, like, of course, everybody wants to start with their own templates, right? I mean, like, because it's a way of anchoring your position in the discussion and making sure that you kind of propose your term and trying to impose them on the other side. It's a tough call, especially if Lana was referring to the big ones, meaning that there is a difference of powers around the table. You're dealing with some big corporation and like companies which have that will most likely hide themselves behind, or like, oh, my legal department will never accept any deviation. This is the standard terms. This needs to be the case. I mean, like, we don't accept any compromise. I guess the point is, like, what's really important. Have an understanding of which are the terms you can live with, which are the terms which, of course, will not be suitable to you. If they're around the table with you, it means that they want the business. If they really want the business, there must be a way of finding a compromise in order to deviate from what are their initial standard templates they're going to pass over to you. Of course, you cannot expect to turn around completely their standard. I mean, like, that's something that would be probably deemed a no-go from their side. But if you are able to identify those few clauses where it will be important for you to anchor your point, because otherwise, I mean, like, for you, there's not going to be any deal. Well, then you should fight for those. I'm pretty sure any of the big ones had made compromise over time. There's no chance, I mean, like, that anyone have accepted always their main terms. So it's a matter of like using pressure on you and being a big company or having a big contract that you want to deal. But again, if you have an understanding of what's really the deal breaker, well, then focus on those, and on the other one, and like, try to find a compromise solution which can suit everyone.
Yeah, and Lana, I know that Lana works in sales, and let me add my perspective on this. I think it's pretty normal also in business that the procurement guy, especially if you're dealing with a big corporation, will want to use their own terms and conditions. I think that's something that cannot change. I'm not able to change it neither. As you know, I'm teaching with 15 business schools, and if I'm negotiating with Oxford, with HEC Paris, or with Cambridge, I mean, I'm not going to be able to put my own contract in the negotiation. I was doing this just this week with one of those leading business schools. They were at the new contract template, and even though we use their contract for certain clauses, rather than just try to modify their clause that it was so spin to their advantage, I suggested, as for the 10.2 we are going to use my clause, and then I put my own clause on that one, and that's when there are a few critical things, then you're gonna insist for your critical ones, and then for the other minor things, then probably you'll have to live with the terms and condition of somebody else. We have one last question, and then we are gonna call it a day for today. Do you bring legal folks? What is your opinion?
Well, it depends. Generally, I would say a legal team is always useful, and at a certain point of the discussion, it needs to be there. Do you bring them with you since the start, or do you wait? It depends of the discussion you're having with your counterpart. The worst scenario you might have is actually showing up in a team, in a meeting without having anticipated and like who you're going to bring with. Because if you're not offering the same opportunity on your counterpart to build up their teams so that they're actually at the same type of disciplines, then it will be perceived as a threat, and they might close on themselves, and therefore like more aggressive or defensive during the discussion. So you want to have a legal team at the first meeting? It depends. It could be useful if it's mutually accepted, or if the maturity of the discussion is advanced and it's really about drafting or reviewing the contract terms. On the other hand, if you're really at the early stage and you're trying to find an area with the commercial principle, well, maybe the team could not be expanded to have external legal advisor or internal legal advisor. My advice it's always try to be clear with your counterpart and who's going to be there, so that you don't have bad surprises, and they're not going to perceive it as a bad surprise if you come up with the composition of the team, which might include technical, legal, fiscal, or other type of advisor.
Yeah. Let me bring also my 2 cents on this topic, Cedric. I will say 2 things. First, like Filippo was correctly mentioning, this is part of the process setting, right? In negotiation, usually there are 3 components: process, the substance, what you're working, and the relationship. Now, we tend to forget the process. But this is really one of the elements that Filippo was mentioning. Before the meeting, you decide, okay, what's the objective of this meeting? How many meetings are we going to have? By when do we want to be finished? Who are the people that are going to be at the meetings? Who needs to be copied? Who is the decision maker? And all those kind of things. So I think that's where, at this moment, where you clarify at which moment you bring the legal people. My pragmatic advice is most of the time, from my experience, the legal people tend to bring a more rigid view of the situation, right? So probably because, of course, they are paid to defend the interest of their company, and I met a few brilliant legal people, very flexible. I also met a number of them that were quite rigid in their thinking. So maybe as much as possible, first have the commercial discussion, and only a bit later into the process, then you bring the legal people. I think we are at the end of this LinkedIn Live, and Filippo, thank you very much. We learned so much about the oil and gas and the kind of challenges that you face in negotiating long-term agreement in this field, and the team negotiation, the cultural element, and all the things that we discovered this LinkedIn Live. Let me remind you, if you want to continue the learning, tomorrow we have another LinkedIn Live. It's at 2 o'clock, same time, 2 o'clock Central European time, and the topic is influencing for career success. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
Thanks for everyone.
Exactly. And then, maybe, I don't know if we can put in the chat also the link to the event for people that want to sign up, because it is free. And next Friday at 1 o'clock, an event with Oxford professor Owen Derbyshire, and the topic on the 25th instead is going to be psychology of influence and persuasion. In the masterclass on influence and persuasion, 15 and 16 of June in Geneva. So a number of opportunities to continue the learning journey. I hope you will continue to be with us for those events, and hopefully look forward to reconnect with you tomorrow for our next webinar. Filippo, thank you very much. It was
thanks to you.
Really inspiring, and we can see it also from the comments that we are getting for the audience, that your knowledge was very much appreciated by our audience. All the very best to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Ciao.